My name is Keshwani. That's K-E-S-H-W-A-N-I, Keshwani. We are here because we want to learn algebra. Today is our lesson number 161. Day 161, we are in the process of solving word problems from day 101 through 200. Today is our 61st day. The problem is already on the blackboard for today. Here is how it goes. We are told that A years ago, A is some number, A is some quantity. We are told that A years ago, Mike was T times as old as David. For example, we might be given 5 years ago, Mike was 3 times as old as David. Who is D years old? Who was D years old then? D for David. One more time. A years ago, Mike was T times as old as David. Who was D years old then? David was D years old. How old is Michael now? That's all. How old is Mike now? What I want you to do is pause the video, solve the problem yourself, and once you have the answer, you can resume it. Here we go. Here's the solution. You just have to think logically, that's all it is. It's not that complicated, just think logically. What's the punchline today? What's the punchline here? The punchline is this. How old is Mike now? This is what we call our punchline. Let's give this punchline a variable. Let's pretend Mike is M years old right now. Let's pretend Mike is M years old. Now, in other words, M is our unknown here. In other words, M is our unknown here. Everything else is a known quantity. Everything else is a known quantity. Yes, this is a known quantity. Why is it a known quantity? Because we are told how many years ago? A years ago. It's a given quantity, A, even though it's not a number, but that's what algebra is. Algebra is arithmetic in abstract concepts. This is a known quantity. How many times old was he? He was T times as old. How old was Dave? How old was Dave back then? He was D years old. These are all known quantities. This is a known quantity. 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 Some people call it known quantity. Some people call it given quantity. These are givens. The only unknown here is how old is Michael. That's the question. How old is Michael? That's the unknown. So let's pretend that Michael is M years old. We're giving this unknown variable name. Now usually, traditionally, most people would say whatever the unknown is, they call it X. I like to call it some logical name. Since we are looking for Michael's age, let's call it M instead of calling it X. Let's pretend he's M years old today. We are told that if that's true, let's pretend Michael is M years old today. If that's true, then A years ago, Michael must have been however old he is today. We are pretending that he's M years old today. For example, if he's 13 years old today, then 3 years ago, if A happens to be 3, then 3 years ago, if he's 13 years old today, then 3 years ago, he must have been 13 minus 3. If we're going to pretend that if Michael is 30 years old today, then 12 years ago, if A happens to be 12, then 12 years ago, he would have been 30 minus 12. Therefore, since he's M years old today, then A years ago he must have been m minus a. M minus a years old. And at that point we are told, and at that point we are told David was D years old. We are told that part, David was D years old. Well, let's continue then. But we are told that at that point in time, D years ago, we are told that Mike was T times as old as David. So we know Michael's age. Michael's age back then, A years ago, was M times A, and David's age was D. And Michael's age at that time, A years ago, Michael's age was T times as old as David. Michael was T times as old as David. So we're going to incorporate that into an equation. I need the room, so let's erase this part. So we're going to continue this. We're going to pick it up from here on the top. So Mike's age then equals T times Dave's age then being A years ago. Well, Mike years then was A years ago, then Mike A years ago. Mike's age was M minus A. And that happens to be T times Dave's age, which we are told is D. That's it. We have our equation. That's the biggest hurdle. Once we have our equation, we can solve for the unknown. The unknown is right here still. The unknown is M. M is the unknown. The unknown is M. So all we have to do is solve this equation for M, which is very easy. All we have to do here is get rid of this A. How do we get rid of this A? By adding A to both sides of the equation. If we add both sides of the equation, if we add A to both sides of the equation, what we end up is this negative A and positive A drop out. That was the whole point. And therefore our unknown M equals T times D, TD plus A. There you go, that's our answer. The question was, how old is Michael today? So Michael is this many years old. Michael is this many years old. Now what are we going to do? Now, to make sure that we in fact do have the right answer, as always, as we have done every single time, as always, which is the habit that you should also get into, which is to spend extra few seconds buy the insurance policy to make sure that this in fact is the correct answer. How do we buy the insurance policy? By plugging in numbers for the variables in the original problem, and thereby converting the original problem from an algebraic problem into an arithmetic problem. Solve that problem, the arithmetic problem that you create, find the answer, and then see if this expression gives you the same answer. This expression right here, see if it gives you the same answer. Let's do it. Again, I need a lot of room, so we need to erase everything now. That's it, we don't need any of that. Let's pretend. Okay, so we're going to verify now. Verify our answer. Let's pretend 10 years ago. So we already plugged in the value for one variable, which is A, because in the problem it says A years ago. We're plugging in 10 for A. 10 years, let's pretend 10 years ago, Mike was twice as old as David. Twice as old. So that's your T. T times as old. T times being 2 times as old. T is your T equals 2. And let's also pretend, the These are some numbers that we're plugging in. You should try it on your own. Plug in different numbers of your own and follow the same logic and see if you can verify on your own with different numbers. You can plug in any number you want. And let's pretend Dave was 10 years old, but Dave was 3 years old 10 years ago. So I'm going to read the problem now one more time, the original problem. I'm not going to write the original problem on the blackboard. I'm going to read it to you and you read it with me. Go back to the original problem and replace the variables with the numbers. So I'm going to read it again. A years ago, Mike was, A years ago, this is your A years ago, Mike was T times as old as David, T times as old as David, this is your T, twice, T equals 2. Who was D years old then? Who was D years old then? Question is, how old is Michael now? Let's find out how old is Michael now, based on these numbers. I need the room. We're going to do the work up there, so we're going to put down this answer on the side here. So our answer was M equals T times D plus A. So 10 years ago, Michael was twice as old as David, and David was 3 years old. Dave was 3, which implies Mike must have been 6, which also implies that today Mike must be 16, because we are talking about 10 years ago. So if he was 6 years old 10 years ago, then today he must be 16. Well, that's it, we're done. This is 16 is our answer. Let's see if this gives us 16, shall we? So where we see T, we replace it with 2. Where we see D, we replace it with 3. That's 6. 2 times 3 is 6. And where we see A, we replace it with 10. Voila, 16 years old. Makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense that if Dave was 3 years old, why do I say if? Because we're just plugging it in. We just made up a number for D. We could have made up a different number here. Instead of 3, we could have made it up 17, and the whole thing would have changed. Obviously, we have to rework the whole thing. If he was 3 years old 10 years ago, if Dave was 3 years old 10 years ago, if Dave was 3 years old, if Dave was 3 10 years ago, then that implies that Mike must have been 6, because we are told that Mike is twice as old as Dave 10 years ago. Mike must have been 6. Well, if Mike was 6 10 years ago, then today he must be 16. So this answer that we came up with, this algebraic answer that we came up with, better give us 16 when we replace all the variables with the numbers. And we did get 16. It is the correct answer. That's all. That's it. We're done. I will see you tomorrow on day number 162. Let me take a quick look what we have. Oh, we have some more. Well, we have one more age problem, which is going to involve 3 people. Yesterday we talked about Mike and Dave. Today we talked about 2 people, Mike and Dave again. No, yesterday we talked about a boy and a father, 2 people. Today we talked about 2 people, Mike and Dave. Tomorrow we're going to do a problem which is going to involve 3 people. So I'll see you tomorrow on day number 162. Alright? Thanks.